Also, I see. Well, good morning. Good morning, Allison and Amanda, Elizabeth, Monique. I think a few more people will arrive in a minute. Today, we're going to do chapter 9 in the book, which is all about communications and in organizations. And they really mean work organizations here. This is kind of what they're talking about. So, I think we're going to begin on page 169. It talks about the way mostly U.S. workplaces are structured. After we look at this, we're going to consider how 3 features of organization kind of shaped your experience in college. We're going to examine the reciprocal relationship, the two-way street between an organization's communication and its culture. They kind of are reflected. A workplace culture has a lot of different components, but they affect, like hierarchical, they affect how the communication flows. So here we go. I think, can you put it on here? We're going to just dive in. We're sharing the screen. Can you see me at all?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, good. I feel when I do the PowerPoint, I feel a little cut off from you. I can see you on a screen to my right, and I can see what you're seeing, but I didn't know if you could see me as well. And that's not important that you can. I just feel really impersonal hiding behind the PowerPoints. Someone else has joined. Alana's here. Hi, Alana.
The PowerPoint goes up top and you fall to the right in the little box on mine.
Oh, that's okay. That's good enough. You know, honey, it's not sliding. Trying to get, oh, here it is. So it's really sliding slowly, and now it's gone on to 3. It's not working very well. No. Okay. They have this really interesting way of starting this chapter. It's a little bit long. It's in this green box on page 170. It's a hospital setting, and it says a patient dies after what should be routine surgery, what should have been routine surgery. His is this is a staggering number, 100 to 200,000 deaths that result from preventable medical errors in U.S. hospitals each year. There's an in-text citation, Gupta, 2012. As soon as a patient is pronounced dead, the blame game begins. The doctor in charge of the case claims the nurse was not monitoring vital signs. Does someone need in? Are we doing that? No. Okay. Welcome to everybody. We're on page 170, chapter 9. We're just reading an initial story about communication in the workplace and a real problem that sometimes happens in workplaces. As soon as the patient is pronounced dead, the blame game begins. A doctor in charge of the case claims the nurse was not monitoring vital signs. The nurse insists that she noted drops in the patient's blood pressure on the chart, but the doctor didn't see it or pay attention. The doctor said the nurse should have told him personally about the drop, not just made a note in the chart. It was that urgent. The nurse replies that the doctor has yelled at her when she has called his attention to previous patient information. Both the nurse and the doctor seem more interested in defending themselves rather than figuring out what went wrong and stopping it for the next time. And it says that is almost inevitable in a culture of blame. And so in an organization that maybe there are lawsuits, or maybe there's legal liability, or maybe it's just heavily focused on blame, often it's harder to solve problems in that kind of communication system because people are really busy covering themselves, defending themselves. making sure. When assigning blame as a priority, staff may hide errors rather than report them, and they may protect themselves and their friends rather than talk honestly about what is the problem instead of who is the problem. Evidence that a culture of blame can be I'm sorry. All right, back. When assigning blame as a priority, staff may hide errors and they may protect themselves and their friends rather than talk honestly about what's really the problem. And evidence that this culture of blame type of situation can be counterproductive has convinced many healthcare organizations to try to change it by cultivating a culture of safety to reduce risks and to improve care for patients. I'm all for that. A safety culture exists when management and employees share a strong commitment to ensuring the safety of the work environment and to making the safety of the patients, the clients, and the employees paramount. In a safety culture, employees at all ranks feel free to report errors and near misses without fear of being reprimanded or punished. Open communication increases awareness of challenges to safety and ensures and enables teamwork in overcoming them. I think that's amazing. I hope that works. To assess their culture, many hospitals rely on a survey that asks staff members to rate their organization's emphasis on teamwork, their openness in communication about errors, and the freedom to question actions and decisions, including those of staff with higher authority, hierarchies. Hospitals with more open communication have stronger safety culture, which studies show means better patient care. So they chose this really dramatic example to show how communication can be a life and death matter and how it can be changed to be a better culture that has a better outcome for your patients, even to the point of more life-saving communication. I thought that was an amazing story. So we're going to look at key features of organization and key features of communication. So, I'm going the wrong way. I have to go back to the beginning. Aha! Structure. Structure orders activity in organizations and elsewhere too. It's a set of procedures, of relationships and practices that provide predictability. They understand the roles, the procedures, and the expectations of doing work. Most modern organizations have a hierarchical structure where there's a hierarchy, a ladder, a chain of command. Sometimes it mirrors the military style chain of command. There's one leader and that person has several people who report to them and they have several people who report to them. They assign different levels of power and status to different members, and they specify who's supposed to communicate to whom. Well, you have to talk to them about that. I can't take care of HR. That's HR's department. Rigidly hierarchical structures, organizations have really strict rules, and sometimes they don't just say, they don't just mention it nicely. They refuse to help outside of their command. It's considered kind of an affront. In loosely organized kind of organizations, anybody can talk to anybody. And I think there are good things and bad things about both of those. It just depends on the needs of the organization. The communication network is related. There are formal links that usually go up the chain of command. And even if it's more loosely structured, they will have people who are in charge of one sort of area, HR, greeting, shipping, and those people are the people who get that type of communication most often. Informal links are different. Informal links might be everybody at the same level. In a company, they may get together to have lunch or talk. People may socialize outside of work. They give examples like in a college, faculty may belong to social networks that include colleagues. Task networking might consist of people with whom they discuss teaching at other colleges and research. And there might be networks that arise to take care of special problems, like everybody may be on some sort of committee to solve a problem or set up a holiday party. So sometimes you may belong to several different layers of communication. You may be in a committee, you may be in a team, you may eat lunch with a different group of people. So communication is different in those situations. And virtual networking makes it even more kind of complicated. There is a third thing that kind of informs the structure of a company and the communication within it, whether it's hierarchical or more loose, is one thing. The different types of committees and communication that networks that exist within the company is a second thing that define the company, how well they communicate, how well they do their work, kind of are equal. But they say you can't just judge a company's success completely on its communication, because sometimes outside factors, external environments, also impact a company, obviously. And they give you the example here: during a recession, some companies closed. It wasn't because they had bad communication, it was because it was a recession. So sometimes you can't judge a company if it's not successful. You can't say, well, they didn't have a good communication method. They can just, sometimes there are links to external in environments. We're going to talk about organizational culture. This is interesting. When you talk about the culture of an organization, I've read statistics that say more people lose their jobs at work. More people lose their jobs because of lack of organizational culture understanding rather than lack of technology skills. So you can be very, very skilled at your work, but if you don't understand the organizational culture, you might make mistakes that mean that you're not as successful at your work. And so often people will leave if they don't fit quite in the corporate culture. It's ways of thinking, acting, and understanding work that are shared by members of an organization and that reflect an organization's distinct identity. What if a workplace says, we want everybody to work till the project's done. You stay till midnight to get it done, but you have other obligations, and that wasn't your understanding when you got hired. There's a difference in the culture and your personal needs. So if everybody there expects everybody to stay at work till midnight to get the project done, you might not want to stay at that place. It might not be the place for you unless you're one of the people who likes to do that. Relationship between communication and organizational culture is this: member communication creates, sustains, and sometimes changes organizational culture. Sure. And organizational culture influences members' patterns of communication. And they're going to talk a little more about that. There's a vocabulary, and this vocabulary can be something that you use at work. It can be technical jargon. It can be specific words to your workplace. When I went to college, we ate lunch in the caf, not the cafeteria, the caf. It was just a word that people used there that was specific to that organizational culture. There often is hierarchical language, and you've seen it, yes, sir, the chain of command. And sometimes if you have a workplace that has that, where there's hierarchical language, it mirrors the military a little bit in language, using titles, ma'am, sir, kind of really formal structure. And traditionally in US workplaces, they have often been very heavily filled with men. So the language that has developed in many culture and many companies tends to be a little more traditionally masculine, like based on sports that perhaps were thought of as traditionally masculine. For example, they give you some examples of, oh, that was a home run, or oh, you hit it out of the ballpark, or giving you a ballpark estimate. Those phrases come from sports, and they were started by people who watch sports, and traditionally that was more male oriented. It's changing now. Women watch sports, women see sports. But I remember when I got out of grad school, my head of the department said, everybody should get this book and read these sports metaphors so you understand them. So when they use them at work, if you're not a sports fan, you want to know what they are. And I thought it was silly, but they have a list of them. And then they have a box on 175. And this is not only important for people who perhaps aren't sports fans, but people from other countries or other cultures that don't even have the same sports to even know how they would work. For example, at a meeting with Indian executives, Alan Garino, the CEO of Cornell International, tried to change a contractual clause by demanding a jump ball scenario. Now, if you watch basketball, you know what a jump ball is. If not, that might make no sense to you whatsoever. And the Aflac CEO, remember the duck, Aflac, Dan Amos baffled Japanese executives when he told them that using the Aflac duck for ads would be a slam dunk. That's a basketball term. But if they didn't watch basketball, if they didn't have that there, they didn't understand that phrase. You see that all the time, home run. That's a baseball phrase. A lot of other countries don't play baseball. A Hail Mary pass, that means a big, risky desperation move, comes from football. So they're just pointing out that sometimes the language itself that's used can make certain groups feel more comfortable, and other groups have to work harder to understand those terms and get in. And it's something, if you use those terms and you're talking to somebody who doesn't use them, maybe think about it. They also give you some other examples, but then they do this thing that's interesting. They say this is also seen in some organizations. If they sort of were started by women, they might use traditionally feminine interests. A lot of words like put on the back burner, stir the pot, nurse an idea along, give birth to a plan. And I when I read that, I kind of bristled and I thought, I don't know if that's true. And then I remembered that yesterday in class, I said, put it on the back burner. So apparently it might be true. I apologize to anybody who doesn't cook at all, who didn't know that back burner meant put it back in another unimportant place. So they talk about hierarchical language, and they talk about some businesses have language that's more masculine. They also have a section in there of some other terms that they use that aren't sports related, that are kind of more from traditional masculine fields. It's hard to talk about that this day because those terms don't always make sense anymore. But they point out that your language at work can include people, or it can make people feel excluded. Maybe that's something for everybody to consider. They talk about these interesting stories that are told at work, and they make this analogy that we tell stories in families, and that we tell stories of our family history, and they kind of reinforce, I don't know, family values, family views of each other. So corporate stories also convey the values, the style, the history of an organization. Organizations have favorite stories that can sometimes reflect their collective visions of themselves, like their origin story, how they started. Well, we started in someone's garage, and at first we were just a little family-owned business, but we worked our way up, and it kind of gives you the story, the identity of the corporation. Or Google, where they tell you the story, and it reflects their collective vision of themselves as new and innovative and hardworking. When they retold stories among members of an organization, these stories can kind of make the new people hearing the stories share these feelings and be included and part of the team. Often you hear these stories when you're new. People will walk around and tell new people as they're given a tour the story of the way the company started. Or another thing they do is they tell personal stories. And here's one in this book. Members of an organization, someone at work, will tell a story about themselves that announce how they see themselves. For example, if Sabra perceives herself as a team player, she could simply say, I'm a team player. But she doesn't do that all the time. Sometimes she might say, well, when I first started working at the clinic, most people were operating in isolation, and I thought a lot more could be done if we all came together. So let me tell you something I did to make that happen. After I'd been on staff for 3 months, I was assigned to work up a plan for downsizing our billing. But I talked with other managers and I met with people, and then the plan we came up had everybody's input because I wanted everybody to be on the team and not just work in isolation. So she's kind of defined herself to the new people by telling a story about herself that she wanted you to see her as. And they say that happens, maybe not as long a story, but that happens a lot at work. And those are kind of ways that shape the organizational culture. The third thing is collegial. They'll tell about other people. Well, this person is the person you want to go to because she can always sort things out, and they might tell you a story of how she always sorts things out. So these stories kind of teach new workers how to get along with others. And then the stories give you a hint how everybody sees that person. And if they say that that's a really go-to person, then you feel comfortable going. If they say, I wouldn't, you might know to stay away. So they're kind of coaching you with these stories that develop the culture of the workplace, what you tolerate, what you're expected to tolerate, what you're expected to contribute. And then they have this section that also contributes to corporate culture. And I thought this was absolutely fascinating. They say rites. I often think of rites as a religious kind of thing, or the Masons and the Shriners have rites. They're ceremonies almost. They're times where they get together to commemorate some sort of aspect of the culture in one event. So it might be graduation. That's a rite that we would have here at school. It commemorates an event of students finishing their work and moving on into their future, beginning their future outside of school. But they talk about some of these rights aren't positive. They say that the right, well, they say there are, well, a retirement, that's a rite of passage. Rites of integration are holiday parties and annual picnics. They happen routinely and they commemorate an event, but they become part of the corporate culture, part of the company culture. We always do this. We always have a company party. We always commemorate somebody when they retire. Organizational cultures also include rights. This is the part that I think is interesting, that praise people. You might get an award. We have an award ceremony every year, and everybody gets an award. Everybody gets a 5-year plaque as well for being there and putting in their time and being devoted to our company. Those are rights that you might have in a company, but they suggest that firing people is a right. There's sort of a little ritual event, and there's a procedure that they go through routinely to fire someone. So not all rights are positive, but they are part of the culture. I worked at a place, and the right for firing was that they would walk the person right to their desk so they could get whatever they could carry, and then they would walk them out the door that very day. It was a terrible right. It was a terrible right. With their little box of items, walking them right out the door. It was terrible. Here's a nice right. Audrey talks about in my sorority. We recognize sisters who make the dean's list each semester by putting a rose on their plate at dinner. That way, everyone realizes who's done well academically. And we can also remind ourselves that scholarship is one of the qualities we aspire to. That's nice. They have renewal rights. They have training, and you might get a certificate for having taken. Right now, Lean Six Sigma are these big courses that everybody's taking, but you could be taking a Microsoft course and then the next course with Microsoft, or a Google Classroom course and then getting the next one. Those are rights as you go through. There's something different that they have. They're like rights. They're rituals, and rituals don't necessarily bring together everything into one event, but they happen. They happen in companies. I'm going to find the definition so I can read it to you, make it clear. I don't feel like I did a good job there. Rituals are forms of communication that occur regularly and that members of an organization perceive as a familiar and routine part of an organizational life, like the daily announcements or the newsletter, something that happens all the time to get people started, or the weekly email from the boss. They happen routinely, they're rituals. But rites are more formal, like ceremonies. I never thought of a firing as a ceremony, really, a rite. I'd see in the military on TV when they pull people's stripes off and demote them. It is sort of a ritual. Yeah, it's almost a ceremony. There are also task rituals, and I think this is interesting. This is almost like a script It's a ritual. They do it over and over again. And they have this example of how sometimes police are trained when they stop when an officer stops a person in a traffic stop, they may have these sort of ritualistic questions. May I see your license? Do you know how fast you were going? Do you know why I stopped you? So they ask these things, and they must do it for a reason. It buys them time. It helps them assess the situation by the answers the person is giving. So there are different types of rituals, but they all affect a corporate culture. These tasks, rituals, these other kinds of rituals, the organizational rights, and the stories, and the vocabulary. There's a little bit more. There's structures. Structures in an organization are the roles. And the role is not tied to any person. Sometimes it seems like it is because they've been in that job forever. But ideally, the role could be filled by another person. So it might be the vice president, it might be the secretary or the administrative assistant, it might be the vet, it might be the scheduler. That's actually a role that person does that another person could fulfill. And those things determine how the communication goes in a culture. You talk to HR, you talk to the scheduler, you talk to the receptionist, and you know who they talk to. If you want to send out an email, you may have to talk to the person who does that weekly. Somebody's in charge of that. They also have rules. Rules are patterns of interacting. They're present in organizational contexts, just like they are in other settings. But some of the rules aren't explicit. There are some that are regulative and they're flat out, you have to do them. Some are just unspoken rules, like show up at the Christmas party or the holiday party. Maybe they didn't tell you that. I worked at a place, I was a hall director at a college, and one of the unspoken rules was everybody has to have a Super Bowl party, but they never told anybody. So people who had been there knew that rule, and the newer people didn't have the Super Bowl party scheduled. And I saw them get in trouble one time because they didn't pull out of thin air an unspoken rule and have a Super Bowl party for their hall. Some of the rules, though, are about communication. And this little snippet, I've kind of alluded to it before, by Lyle, shows, I found out the hard way that a company I worked for was dead serious about the organizational chart, the hierarchy. I had a problem with a coworker, so I talked with a guy in another department that I was friends with. Somehow my supervisor found out and he blew a gasket. He was furious that I had gone outside of the chain of command instead of coming straight to him. And so those are the kind of rules that are hopefully made explicit in your training and in your manual and when you're hired, but sometimes there are unspoken rules. There are also policies. Policies are much more formal. They're statements of practices that reflect and uphold the organizational culture. Most of them are policies about hiring, promotion, benefits. They also kind of reflect not just that organization, but larger culture. Things change all the time. For example, when I was about 18, in the paper, they would put want ads, like to find a job, but they had a section, women and men. And you could look for a job based on whether you were a woman or a man. And I think that's almost illegal now, unless there's an absolute need for one person to do that job. And so the policies will probably prohibit that now in a corporation, whereas they didn't before because apparently they didn't think about it. By the way, in the paper, the women's jobs were very traditionally woman, secretary, receptionist, and the men's were banker, insurance agent. And it's hard for me to realize that I grew up in a time where we still did that. We still offered jobs to people based on gender. But your book points out something, and I want to show you this. And I hadn't thought of it. Tell me if if you think it's the same. They have a little example of similar gendered job postings on 174. It's back 2 pages, and it's not explicitly saying a man or a woman, but they're suggesting that maybe the language here might be perceived as this job is for a man or this job is for a woman. What if they said an opening for a manager who is aggressive and ready to tackle mission critical? That's a football image and aggressive. So it's possible that that job could be kind of implied, or people could infer that that might be more for a man. Maybe not, maybe not. What about this? An opening for manager who has passion for learning and building partnerships. According to tech companies that make software used in hiring, the first post is likely to attract mainly males, and the second is likely to attract primarily females. Why? Because the language has subtle clues or even biases that signal sort of gender preferences. Of these, the tech company has, one of these, the tech company's identified in more than 25,000 phrases that indicate gender bias. Oh, wait, I read that wrong. One of the tech companies doing the research has identified 25,000 phrases that indicate some gender bias. Job posts that include references to aggressiveness, sports, and military are nearly always intended for men, not just perceived as for men, but when they go to find out, they were perceived as. So apparently they're not writing for men or women explicitly, but sometimes it's still appearing in the ad sort of in a more subtle fashion, that they're encouraging more men to apply or encouraging more women. I thought that was interesting. I hadn't noticed that. I hadn't thought of it. Oh, I'm moving along. I'm not doing a good job with my slideshow. I can't get it to slide. It's not even sliding. Can you hook over here and make it slide with the mouse? No, now it's gone completely. Oh, it's back. Aha. This is what I wanted to talk about because this is kind of where we are today. Digital media and organizational communication. It says there are advantages. There's a potential to increase productivity, right? And efficiency. It increases organizational flexibility. You can still have the meeting even if someone is at home because you can zoom in. It enlarges the range of professional contacts. They have the example of LinkedIn, but you can do professional networking online. It increases the marketing reach. It's a lot cheaper, your book points out, to send out an email blast or to put out a tweet, reaching people, and you don't have to pay for it. It's faster. And I have some examples. I have students in the past who said that when they had a problem with their order in Taco Bell, they'd get on Twitter and they'd post a negative remark about their Taco Bell experience. And within a very short amount of time, they would have an apology and a coupon for free Taco Bell. It's that quick. Sometimes, though, I have to say that, I read an example of a guy who was using Twitter. He sold ice cream truck. He sold some special ice cream in New York City where the buildings are so tall. People couldn't hear the little bell of the ice cream truck. So he would send out a tweet to all of his customers. I'm in the 1600 block. I'll be there from 10 to 10:30. And the tweet meant they had time to come all the way down without hearing. And I thought that was a brilliant use of Twitter. I don't know if you remember 2 years ago, the football, maybe 3 years ago, the football game, the Super Bowl had a blackout and the lights went out for, 28 minutes, 39 minutes, a long time. And Twitter immediately was able to, Oreo, the cookie company, was immediately able on Twitter to put a picture of themselves, and it was cookies and milk, and it said, you can still dunk in the dark. And everybody thought it was really clever. They had already had that campaign ready for something else, and they were able to just put it right in there. But the trouble is it didn't really increase their sales. So sometimes, even though it's cheap and easy, it doesn't actually mean that you get more sales. But there are many, many examples of advantages with digital media and electronic email. There is something that may or may not be, and that's what I wanted to talk about. A recent Gallup poll said, and it's from 5 years ago, it said that 1/3 of workers said they're expected to check email and texts now and be in touch with their office after work hours. Does anybody have that experience? They could change your hours. They might call you back in if somebody doesn't come in. Do they expect you to be available 24/7? I thought that was interesting. This is it startled me and scared me, this last little part. Some employees report that their companies require them to download an app, it's a GPS system, that monitors where they are 24 hours a day. How much do we have our work involved in our lives? That's kind of the question for work-life balance. And they're giving us guidelines for effective communication here in organizations. They say balance investments in work and the rest of your life. And I think the caveat is if you can. I mean, sometimes the workplace has to make the rules because that's a tight job market and you just can't leave. But it says none of us is only a career person. We all have other things we do. Parents, citizens, people who have responsibilities outside of the workplace, for example. And they're encouraging us to think about work-life balance. And they point out that many workplaces haven't really been thinking about this. They haven't made it easy to have a life outside of work. In a survey of people who work outside their homes, 48% of women and 39% of men said that the demands of work interfered with their personal lives too often. That maybe almost 40% of women and 27% of men said they had put off childbearing, starting a family, or continuing their family because work was just too heavy. So I thought that was a really interesting statistic. And then they built on that, and they said the United States is the only Western country that doesn't provide paid family leave to all workers. Some companies do. Some companies provide it to only women, and some provide it to nobody. There are 185 countries in the UN's most recent study. 182 countries offer some level of financial support to new mothers on maternity leave. The 3 that do not are Oman, Papua New Guinea, and the United States. And 70 countries provide paid leave to fathers. So that's kind of exciting. So they can share in the child raising.
Yeah, I thought the United States was starting to do that too, though.
I think they are, but it's not a law. There's no federal law.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it depends. I mean, I know somebody from the 90s, he had parental leave. He was really happy he had gotten a job for parental leave. That was part of the package he negotiated because it was really important to him. But I think at the time that was rare. Now it's more common. And now you
good.
also,
The mothers need that help.
Yeah.
The fact that they don't pay for the FMA leave do they pay? You say United States doesn't pay for the FMA leave?
There's no federal law.
Yeah,
there's no federal law.
I know my job paid for it. They paid me really good, and then it ended up into the FMLA when it kicked in, and they paid me pretty good too.
Okay, I thought so, because Amazon does the same thing, so I was making sure about that. I was wondering about that also.
Like my job used up all my vacation first, and then they would pay after. So
that's what mine did. And then my job also, because it was at a church, so they also had it set up to where they pay you after you use up all your time. They pay you for I think a month or 2 months, and then my FMLA kicked in. So I got paid through my whole pregnancy. I got lucky, very lucky.
That's great.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was very well taken care of.
And I think most places, well, I can't say most, some pay for adopted children. FMLA covers that, right? Yeah. So that's nice too, because they're still not sleeping through the night. They're still doing the same things that babies do.
You said adoption?
Adoption, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it does.
So that's fantastic. Oh, I'm
nice,
so
yeah.
happy. Yeah. Good. That makes me feel really happy. They give you a little bit of a section here on workplace managing personal relationships on the job. And what they say is it's really hard not to have relationships with people at work. Of course, you're going to become friends with them. And they say that there are two things they want to discuss in particular that sometimes cause problems. One is if you're friends with somebody and then they get promoted and now they're your boss. How does that work? Is that a problem?
You know what? I had the same type of problem when I was at Amazon because me and this girl started there at the same time and we both moved up in the same position at the same time. But we're still good friends. I look at her as a best friend, but she did get promoted to a manager before me. So, but she's not my manager though, but we still remain a good communication, but she is my boss though.
So there is a little change sometimes when that happens. It's nice that it's gone well. It's nice. They have a little scenario here written by Anna. She says, it's hard for me now that my best friend has been promoted over me. Part of it's envy because I wanted the promotion too. But the hardest part is I resent her power over me. When Billy gives me an assignment, I feel like my friend shouldn't dump extra work on me just to show. But I also know as the boss, she has to give extra work to everybody sometimes. It just doesn't feel right for my best friend to tell me what to do or to evaluate my work. So that's a problem, I guess, that sometimes comes up. And then they say that romantic relationships between people who work together is increasingly common. We spend so much time at work in our workplaces that sometimes it's just going to happen, I guess, that people are spending so much time together. Is it prohibited at work if they're supervisors to date do workplaces have, do they prohibit it? Does anybody have that experience?
When I worked at the baseball field, we didn't prohibit it. You just had to let them know so that they knew the relationships. And because you can't work in the same area if you are in a relationship, even if it's family. Like my parents worked with me. I was actually their boss and they couldn't work for me. You know, they had to report to someone else.
Is that right? Even if it's family?
Mm-hmm. That's
interesting. I remember reading about 4 or 5 years ago that Harvard put a law on a rule in place that in graduate school, if the person sat on your committee or was your director, that you were not supposed to date them. And I thought, that just now became a rule? It seemed like to me that would have been a rule before. Do you see what I mean? If they were grading your work, obviously to me that seems like there would be a conflict of interest potentially, or people might think so. But apparently they hadn't formalized it and there wasn't a rule. And now there is. So what happens if someone begins dating someone who supervises them?
Okay, I have a quick story. So I'll give them names just because you won't know them. So Thomas and Chachi. Okay, Chachi is the mother of Thomas. Chachi's worked for the company forever. She's a manager. She moved her way up. She's a manager, and she's been a manager for the longest time. Thomas worked for the company since he was 16, so about 15, 16 years now. And he moved his way up also. He wants to move to a higher position that would put him over his mother, and she would have to report to him. Well, in the company, that's not allowed. So to fix that, once he was hired and promoted to that position of higher, they then had her report to someone else.
Oh, I see.
It wouldn't normally be in that chain. It went this way.
So neither of them had to leave the position. They just kind of rerouted the reporting. That's a strategy that's nice.
Yeah.
That seems
So
thoughtful.
they worked it through. Before that, when he was moving up in sort of the position, she did move out of there just to give him room to move in, but then it turned out that she needed to go back. It was just longer. But that's what the end result was. They just switched it around. So if she ever leaves, the person that replaces her would actually go back under Thomas as opposed to who they were reporting to before.
Oh, I see. I see.
So
Well, your book has a little different scenario, like when things don't go so well. This Eugene, he's telling a story. Once I got involved with a woman where I was working. We were assigned to the same team and we really hit it off. One thing led to another. We were dating. I guess it affected our work some since we spent a lot of time talking and stuff in the office. But the real problem came when we broke up. It's impossible to avoid seeing your ex when you work together in a small office, and everyone else acted like they were walking on eggshells around us. She finally quit, and you could just feel the tension drain out of everybody else in the office. Do you think that's one of the reasons they say that they don't permit it at some workplaces? It's not just that it's a conflict of interest, perhaps, but if it goes badly if they break up, I didn't mean to say when, if they break up, then I see the problem. I see the problem. I wanted to show you on 182 something, because I think we should talk about this. Keeping track of employees, and they have a list, it's in 182. In most cases, employers have the right to monitor employees' computer screens when they're working and to see what's cached or what's stored in the computer terminals and hard disks. Did you realize this? If you use your email at work, if you use your Facebook, anything that you have, because you're using their equipment and you're on their time, they have the right to look at, to own, to save, to cache. And they usually don't, but sometimes if there's a lawsuit later, they might go through their cache stuff to see what was going on. There were some really famous lawsuits. Motorola, about 25 years ago, was sued for creating a hostile workplace because someone in their company was sending jokes that were pretty offensive, racist jokes. And there was a lawsuit, and Motorola said, we didn't know. We never saw it. And the court said it was your equipment and it was your workspace on your time. You should have known. You had a duty to know what was being sent on your stuff. So companies are like, well, then we're keeping it, so that we can keep track. And you should probably know that if you didn't, you probably should just know that they can look at your stuff. Often workplaces can. They own it, actually, I think. So that if you were to write the great American novel on your work computer at lunch, every day, write another page, and you want to sell it, they technically would own it because it was done on their equipment, on their time. If you were to take it home, your computer, you have a little laptop and you take it home so you're not on their time, and you use AutoCAD and you develop a new thing and you find a company to produce it, some artwork or some engineering thing, they own it, because even though it was at your home on your time, it was still using their equipment. And so the courts would say they own it. So if you're going to write the great American novel, write it on your own at home. I know, it's crazy, right? But it's true. They say employers, in most cases, have the right to monitor your internet usage, including your email. I've been at workplaces where people spend a lot of time shopping on eBay. And I mean, if their workplace said it was okay, it's one thing. I never knew if their workplace was, I was just a temp. I didn't know what the rule was. I didn't shop on eBay because I was, well, I'm not an eBay shopper anyway. In most cases, employers have the right to monitor employees' phone calls and to obtain records of calls made. I don't know how that works on your own cell phone. I don't think it does, but I'm not sure. It says personal calls are an exception. They are supposed to cease monitoring if they realize a call is personal. And in most cases, employers have the right to videotape employees. You probably knew that. I used to work at a coffee shop and they would videotape I guess to make sure we weren't drinking the coffee, drinking up all of their profits. There were little video cameras. So one guy came and he would just go around the corner and drink the coffee. He was so brave. I don't know. I wouldn't have done it. He had worked there 12 years. They want to assure you that videotaping is not allowed in the bathroom or in locker rooms or in other places where the courts say it would be intrusive, but your workplace can videotape employees. That's no fun. And in 2010, a legal ruling even broadened the employer's rights. It said that an employer's policy about monitoring doesn't have to even tell you every specific type of communication. You know, if it didn't say, what's the new one? FaceTime, because it was written before FaceTime exists, they can still monitor if you use FaceTime at their work. In other words, this is creepy, but employees should assume that they, as well as their phones and computers, are subject to monitoring. It's sort of like when they search purses, when sometimes at workplaces, they'll search through purses. Have you ever worked at a place, at a store where they do that? I think that the courts have held that the company has more of the right than your right to privacy. And electronically, for sure they do. Da-da-da. So I have no idea how to make this work. It doesn't work the way it used to. This little slideshow. Well, I did want to show them. There are some textbook web links here at the bottom of this. You also have this slideshow on your Moodle, and so you could go to them. There is the Journal of Computer Mediated Communication. I think that one has a lot of topics that are written about a lot of articles that are written about in this field of communication. I just wanted to show you that those exist. The assignment for tomorrow. I was going to tell you what it was. I don't even see it. Well, let me ask, do you have any questions about today? Do you have any questions about today? We went through it a lot fast, but it was basically talking about the different ways that communication is affected by the culture of the corporation or the business or the organization, but also how the organization is affected by the culture. There is one thing, they'll say that those informal networks, I forgot to mention this, if you sit with different people at lunch or you're on a committee with people outside of your chain of command, it's more of an informal communication. Very often that's how information gets passed through the company. Someone will hear it in their department and they'll share it. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's gossip, sometimes it's rumor. And they say that rumor in a company, or rumor and a lot of gossip, increases when there's a time of great change and they don't get information from the top. So if you run a company or you run a department and you want to tamp down on kind of rampant rumor mongering, some of which may not be true, you have to be very careful and give the staff the information they need. For example, if they're trying to decide if it's a time of layoffs, who's going to get laid off, there will probably be increased rumors and speculation, and that is possibly not very helpful for your workplace morale. If everybody's talking about who they think should be laid off because this person is more productive and this person is not, it's certainly not going to make people feel good to be, in those kind of conversations, and it can kind of affect workplace morale. Companies that do a better job of keeping their employees in the loop, and they have less rumor mill, less grapevine kind of extraneous conversation. They have this, I thought that this last little scenario was going to have a longer little dialogue, but it doesn't. It's just an example about how some of the communication in a company is not formal. There's no official rule, but in talking to people and understanding the corporate culture, the longer you're there, the more you can pick up on these things. And sometimes the unspoken rules are even more important than the written rules. Case study, Ed misses the banquet. Apply what you've learned in this chapter by analyzing the following case study. Ed recently began working at a new job. Although he's been in his job for only 5 weeks, he likes it a lot. And he's told you that he sees a real future for himself with this company. But last week, a problem arose. Along with all the other employees, Ed was invited to the annual company banquet, at which everyone socializes and awards are given for outstanding performance. Ed's daughter was in a play the night of the banquet, so Ed chose to attend his daughter's play instead of going to the company event. The invitation to the banquet had only said, hope to see you there, and there wasn't an RSVP, so he didn't think anything about it. He didn't mention to anyone that he couldn't attend. But when he arrived at work next Monday morning, he discovered he should have rearranged his plans and either shown up or at the very least maybe told his supervisor that he wasn't going to be there and why. He was talking with several coworkers who had been around a few years, and he discovered that top management sees the annual banquet as a command performance that signifies company unity and loyalty. Later in the day, Ed had the following exchange with his manager. Ed's manager, you skipped the banquet last Saturday. I had really thought you were committed to our company. Ed said, well, my daughter was in a play that night. Ed's manager said, I don't care why you didn't come. We notice who's really with us and who isn't. Have you ever worked at a place where that kind of thing happens? I worked at a place and they had a holiday party, but they only gave presents to staff who could attend. If you had a conflict or you became sick and you didn't attend, you not only didn't get to go to the party, but you didn't get the present. It was important that you show up, I think, and they just let you know by not giving you a present. That's what we have. Are there questions or are there questions today? The assignment is on Moodle. It's a similar assignment. And so I want to let you have a chance to look at it. I've gotten behind in the grading. I'm a day behind. So I'm going to grade as fast as I can today. And I will have both of your things. Wait, that's 4. I'll have both of your things graded today. Okay? For Monday and for yesterday. It's hard for me to grade yesterday's by 8 o'clock in the morning when they're coming in, and then I start teaching at 9. So I will have them done though today, and there's no excuse for the Monday one. I'm sorry. You've been a wonderful class. You've been a wonderful bunch. It's nice to see everybody. Sorry about the lighting. If there are any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, thanks for coming, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank
Have
you.
have a great day.
Thank
Have
you.
a happy day. Thank you. Bye, Colleen. Bye, Alana. Bye, Amanda. Bye, Danielle. Bye, Stephanie. You're leaving. I'm trying to say really fast personally.
Bye.
Bye, Allison. Adios. See you all. Allison's still there. Hey, Allison, if you have a question about your grade, I sent your form to Amanda. And so you should be able to see the grades on your portal very soon. As soon as I sent them to her just before class started. So she should be able to put them into the portal sometime today. And the delay was mine. I should have sent her the form yesterday, but there was a question about it. I didn't quite understand it. And so that delay is my fault. I'm sorry. She has that material now and she can put it into your portal so you can see your grades. But you know what they are. You had 100 on most of your tests. I mean, most of your assignments. I think you had a 90 on one thing. So that looked pretty good for the week. Don't walk off the field now though, okay? And I'm only saying that now because you're the only other one on here. Otherwise, I wouldn't tell you your grade publicly, of course.